Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 173 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at Shane Haff NFL. I am flying solo on today's Week 5 recap edition of the podcast because Mark, unfortunately, was a late addition to the injury report with an illness. So he is probable for next week, but was downgraded. He is not a healthy scratch. He's a sick scratch today. So we are going to dive in as we always do. We're going to walk through all the games thus far in the NFL week, obviously recording in advance of Monday Night Football. So you will not hear any thoughts about the Monday night matchup, but we're going to lead off as we normally do with the divisional action in the NFC, where the NFC East had a perfect weekend with all three of their teams coming out on top. If you guys are watching live, I will throw the box scores up here on the screen as I talk about it. Feel free to drop comments. I would love to interact with you guys this way. In a way, you can all be my guest co-hosts today. So here we go. Let's jump in with the Washington Commanders and the Cleveland Browns. Washington wins this game 34-13, and the Jaden Daniels train rolls on. Daniels finished this game with 238 yards passing. He had 82 rushing yards. He had a touchdown. He did have an interception. One of my biggest concerns about Daniels coming into the NFL draft is I went through my scouting stuff, and you can go find that stuff. It's all on the YouTube channel. You can probably search Jaden Daniels on my timeline and see my 2.5-minute scouting report video that I made for him. But the biggest concern I had for Jaden Daniels was his pressure to sack rate coming out in the draft. He had over a 20% pressure to sack rate, which is a measure of what percentage of the pressures are you then taking a sack on. And that's astronomically high. He only threw a pass from the pocket when pressured 36% of the time his last year at college. And it just hasn't mattered so far in the NFL. He was blitzed 18 times by the Browns defense in this one. And he went 8 of 12 against the blitz for 150 yards. He did take 2 sacks, but he also scrambled 4 times. And so Jaden Daniels continues his tear. You know, we're through 5 weeks of the season as he led the Commanders to a 4-1 record, and he's looked really good so far. And, you know, we talked about a week or two ago is our opposing defense is going to figure him out. And maybe that will happen, but it certainly isn't happening right now as they continue to roll. And what's maybe even more impressive and a testament to Dan Quinn's ability as a head coach is that the Washington defense is stacking good performances as well. Last week, they held the Cardinals to 14 points. This week, Cleveland didn't even have 100 yards of offense until they were partway through the third quarter. And so the defense is playing really well, and I would not consider this a particularly talented defense. They went out and they signed a lot of guys in free agency. They threw a lot of darts at the dartboard, and it's starting to come together. Frankie Louvu had a really good game in this one. They didn't give up a third down conversion until the final drive of the game. They sacked Deshaun Watson 7 times. And so just an outstanding performance all the way around. The Commanders became the first team to score 150 points in their first 5 games of a season while starting an rookie quarterback. And so really impressive start to the year for them. Part of their part of their defensive success in this game was probably playing Cleveland, who that they should be benching Deshaun Watson. He's unplayable at this point. But we've already heard Kevin Stefanski say that he is the starter. They're not considering a quarterback change, which doesn't make any sense to me because Deshaun Watson's clearly not it. But I guess when you trade what you traded and you give the contract that you give, the front office is just not willing to let this one go, even though Jameis Winston is on the bench. But we've seen the offense look more competent under Joe Flacco last season. It would look more competent under Jameis Winston as well, but the Browns just aren't going to do that, which is probably good news for the Eagles as they match up against the Browns this upcoming weekend. Now, I mentioned at the start of the show that Mark is sick, but he did send me some thoughts on some of these games, so I will read those as we get to him. And he said for Washington that he thinks they're going to be 6-3 or 7-2, and they do have a pretty nice schedule coming up. They go at Baltimore, and then they go versus Carolina, versus Chicago, at the New York Giants, and then they get into a tougher stretch with the Steelers, the Eagles, Cowboys, and then they have a game against the Titans. And so they have a pretty favorable schedule as they move forward. And this is a team that, like Mark said, they're probably going to maintain their lead on the NFC East over the next month of the season. So let's move on to Seattle, where the Seattle Seahawks got beat by the New York Giants 29-20. Seattle trailed by 10 in this game, and they got the ball back with just under 6 minutes to go at their own 5-yard line. They went on a 14-play, 95-yard touchdown drive that was capped with a Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown. Then they got a quick 3-and-out from the defense, and they got all the way down to the 28-yard line where they attempted a field goal that was blocked and then returned for a touchdown with under a minute to go. And they end up losing the game. And I'm putting the Seattle Seahawks on fraud alert. I'm putting them on fraud alert because their offense has not gotten off to a good start this season, which maybe you expect that a little bit when you go with a defensive head coach and Mike McDonald, but it's their defense that's really concerning. You're on fraud alert, Seattle, because you gave up 420 yards to a Giants offense, missing their running back one and missing their wide receiver one in Malik Neighbors. Now, we can argue if Devin Singletary should be the running back one for the New York Giants, but Tyrone Tracy, who was a day 3 draft pick, came in and he gets his first start and he rushes for 129 yards. Darius Slayton steps in for Malik Neighbors and has 8 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. This is not a good offensive football team, and they shredded the Seahawks. And I know they only put up 22 points before that punt return or that kick return, that kick that was blocked and returned for a touchdown. But their offense operated at a pretty high level still and put up a lot of yards against this defense. And Seattle's points are also a little deceptive because they had a 99-yard fumble return for a touchdown in the first half of this game. And so, out of those 20 points, 7 of them came from the defense, and they struggled to get into a rhythm in the first half. They only had 4 possessions. Again, you lose a possession with the 99-yard touchdown return, but 4 possessions, they gained 91 yards. They did manage to take it to half 10-10, but they lose. They got a 3-and-out to start the third quarter. They move into Giants territory, and then DK Metcalf for the second week in a row fumbles in plus territory, and the Giants recovered. So just a rough day all around for Seattle. At 3-2, they're still very much, in this division race, especially with the 49ers losing again that we'll get to, but things just don't look right so far in Seattle. So I'm placing the Seahawks on fraud watch. And then let's move on to the Sunday night football game. And Sunday night football, rain delayed this for almost an hour and a half. So this was a really late game by the time it finished, and it gave Dak Prescott to make history. He is the only quarterback now in NFL history to throw an interception in 2 different days in the same game. So the second interception, it comes after the clock struck midnight. That's kind of a fun little thing I saw on Twitter, but Dak Prescott oscillated between hero and GOAT in this game. He threw 2 interceptions. He lost a fumble, but at the end of the day, at the end of the game, they drive down and they've got, I think it was 1st and goal on the 1-yard line. And Rico Dowdle gets hit, helmet on their shoulder pad on the ball, and it pops out. And Dak Prescott fell on it on the 5-yard line. Saves the game potentially for the Cowboys. And then a few plays later on 4th and goal, he throws a touchdown pass that wins the game. And that was Dallas's only touchdown in the red zone of the day. They were 0 for 3 before the last second touchdown, but they got the one that counted, and they win the game. They found a little bit of a rushing attack with Rico Dowdle. He had 20 carries for 87 yards at 4.4 yards per carry. And you do want to be able to run the ball against this Pittsburgh pass rush. And that's something that the Cowboys have struggled with. And I thought Dowdle looked good. He looked fine. He should probably be getting the running back one opportunities for Dallas. And obviously that fumble, I think, was a little bit of a fluke, kind of a fluky play. It was a really good hit by the defender, but I think they will continue to lean on him moving forward. On the other side, Justin Herbert was up and down throughout the day. He only completed 56% of his passes for 131 yards, but he did throw for 2 touchdowns. George Pickens was basically nothing in this game. He was On a snap count, he didn't play a full time, and Mike Tomlin talked about trying to get more effort out of him after the game. He ended with 7 targets, 3 receptions for 26 yards. Najee Harris couldn't get anything going. He had 14 carries for 42 yards, and it's probably not a good sign when you face the number 31 rushing defense in the league, who also happens to be missing their top 4 edge rushers, and you rush the ball for 42 yards on 14 carries, especially as a first-round pick at running back. And so trouble in Pittsburgh with the rushing attack continues, and that they're on a 2-game skid now after starting 3-0. And so you wonder, when that quarterback controversy will start brewing as Russell Wilson continues to get more healthy. I definitely think they should stick with Justin Fields, but we'll see if they do that moving forward. Mark contributes on this one that Dallas should have won by more. He said there were a lot of fluky turnovers and plays in this game, and he's probably right there, but we were sure hoping that Pittsburgh could steal this one away anyways. In this game, TJ Watt became the second fastest player to reach 100 sacks. He did it in 109 games. The person that did it faster was Reggie White, who did it in, I'll pause if you want to guess. He did it in 96 games, so 13 games faster than TJ Watt. Okay, let's keep rolling now. Out of the division, let's go briefly to Thursday Night Football, where the Atlanta Falcons beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 36-30. Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards in this game. I believe that it's a career high. I believe it's the first time in his career he's been over 500 yards. He did it. He almost ended this game as a bit of a goat, throws an interception with under 2 minutes left in the red zone while down 3. So a field goal would have tied this. But the Bucs not only went 3 and out, they lost 14 yards, which pushed them back. And they end up punting the ball. Cousins gets them downfield, and with 12 seconds left at the Tampa Bay 43, he threw a 14-yard pass to Drake London, who was not fast to get down. But they managed to spike the ball with a second left, and they hit a 52-yard field goal to get to overtime, where they won the toss and they get the game-winning touchdown. And so both of these teams now sit at 3-2. The Buccaneers, when there's a running clock situation, maybe you just lay on Drake London for a half a second there after he's tackled so he can't jump up. Maybe somebody should have gotten in the way of the official coming to spot the ball. Nothing blatant, just those quarter seconds count. Unfortunately, that doesn't work out for the Buccaneers. And I thought it was really cool that the receiver that Kirk Cousins threw the touchdown pass to in overtime, Kadarius Hodge, came in for an injured Drake London. And on his first play in, he caught it and took it, I believe it was 45 yards for a touchdown. So it was a nice Thursday night game. We don't often get really good Thursday night games, and this was definitely a good one. But both teams sit at 3-2. Mark says that the Falcons are right where they need to be after a really tough start to the season because they have wins over New Orleans and over Tampa Bay. Obviously, Carolina is not in the running for that division, so the Falcons are in a really good spot as they move forward through the rest of their schedule. Okay, let's go to London, where the Minnesota Vikings faced off against the New York Jets on an early game Sunday morning, and the Vikings win 23-17. Aaron Rodgers really struggled in this game. He completed only 53% of his 54 passes. He threw 3 interceptions. He took 3 sacks. The run game only had 36 yards on 14 carries. He targeted Garrett Wilson a whopping 22 times in this game. And Garrett Wilson brought in 13 of those for 101 yards and a touchdown. Now, there was a chance, as brutal as this game was, there was a chance for the comeback win when Rodgers got the ball. He's down 6 with 3:07 left, and he drove all the way down to the 26-yard line before he threw 2 straight incompletions, and then he got intercepted by Stephon Gilmore on 3rd down. And it wasn't just Aaron Rodgers who struggled in this game. Sam Darnold struggled in this one too. He was only 14 of 31 for 179 yards. He threw an interception. He took 4 sacks. Aaron Jones left this game with an injury, and the Vikings running game just disappeared when that happened. But the Vikings do get the win in London. Now they get their bye week to recoup, hopefully come back from some of these injuries. They get, to unjet lag. I don't think that's how you would say that, but they get to get over their jet lag and move forward. So at their bye week, undefeated, just like we all thought before the season started. On the flip side, the Jets, this is the first time Aaron Rodgers has been under 500 through 5 starts since the 2012 season, which is when, of course, they ended up going 11-5 and winning their division and getting to the playoffs. But that's beside the point. Mark notes he thinks the Jets offense has serious problems, and I tend to agree. There's just not, I don't think there's enough around Garrett Wilson in the receiving core. The running game has been atrocious. Aaron Rodgers is turning the football over. This is just not what Jets fans were anticipating when they traded what they traded for Aaron Rodgers. For him to get hurt at the beginning of the season last year in the first game, to be 2-3 now in year 2, it's got to feel like that window is slamming closed on the Jets. Okay, let's move on to Carolina at Chicago. And again, just drop comments here as you're watching the show. If you've got a take you need to fire off, a question, we can talk about those as we go along. But Carolina loses to the Bears 36-10, and it's got to be difficult if you're a Panthers fan. Watching the wide receiver you traded away, catching touchdowns from the draft pick you also traded away, while the guy you did it for sits on the bench. Like, that's got to be terrible feeling, but that's the Panthers' lot in life. And DJ Moore, he put up a big game. He had two touchdown receptions. He had 105 yards receiving on 5 catches. Caleb Williams probably turned in his best game as a pro, going 20-29 for 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 34 yards. DeAndre Swift had a good game for the Bears with 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. He also added 47 receiving yards. On the Panthers side, I don't know that there's really any good takeaways. Maybe you could say, Chuba Hubbard had 13 carries for 97 yards and a touchdown. He had a 38-yard touchdown run early in the first quarter that gave the Panthers a lead, but it was all downhill from there. And Andy Dalton only had 8 passing yards in the first half. So just a total disaster for Carolina in a game that probably means a lot for them, considering you're playing the guy that was drafted again with the pick that you traded away. And just does not end well for the Carolina Panthers, and they drop to 1-4. Okay, let's roll on to Baltimore at Cincinnati, and this was an incredible game. This was an insane game that at one point featured 7 consecutive touchdown drives. The game ends 41-38 in overtime, but spanning the end of the first half through the first 6 drives of the second half, it was touchdown, 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 and that streak was broken when Marlon Humphrey intercepted a slant route intended for Jamar Chase. And I think, that's probably more on Jamar Chase than it is on Joe Burrow, but he's throwing a trust ball there. And anyways, Marlon Humphrey gets the interception. Justin Tucker channels old Justin Tucker and hits a 56-yard field goal to send this game into overtime. And in overtime, the Ravens get the ball first. They're moving down the field, and then they get to a 1st and 10 at the Cincinnati 39. And as the play clock is running down, Lamar's clapping his hands, calling for the ball, and they rush the snap. It ends up going off of Lamar's hands, and it gets recovered by Cincinnati. And you just got to take a timeout in that situation. It's overtime. You have 2 timeouts. The clock is not an issue here. That's what they're for. And that's just a big mistake that you cannot make in overtime. You can't rush something in that situation, but it really costs the Ravens, and the Bengals fall on the football. And then Zach Taylor is content to kick a 50-plus yard field goal. He runs the ball 3 straight times for 3 total yards with an offense averaging 3.1 yards per carry. Trots out to try a 53-yard field goal. The holder drops it and then tries to get it set, and you end up missing the field goal. What are you doing, Zach Taylor? Like, your quarterback is 30 of 39 passing for 392 yards and 5 touchdowns. How are you not putting the ball in Joe Burrow's hands? And I got a Bengals fan on Twitter was telling me that you should make that decision every time because Evan McPherson's one of the top kickers in the league. And I went and looked it up, and I mean, he's good. He's hit 77% of his 50-plus yard kicks in his career. But are you telling me that you think there's a 23% chance that Joe Burrow is going to turn the ball over again? Like, I would much rather trust Joe Burrow, who you've made your franchise quarterback, to go get a first down and then get conservative. Just make it a little closer. But if that's going to be your decision, if you're going to just settle for the kick, run the ball on first and second down and line up and kick it on third down. So when you get a botched snap, you can just stand up and spike the ball and you can try again on fourth down. I thought that was egregious decision-making by Zach Taylor. And then, of course, Baltimore rips off a 51-yard run and hits a 24-yard field goal to win the game. So I didn't like the process there by the Bengals, but this was an incredible game. It also really threw me off in this game when Mark Andrews caught a pass and was referred to as the, quote, other tight end by the commentators. I guess it's fully Isaiah Likely season now, but Isaiah Likely only had 13 yards in this game, but he did have 2 touchdowns. It was good to see Mark Andrews involved again. Lamar Jackson was electric in this game. He had some absurd plays, including a touchdown pass where the snap hit the ground. He picks it up. He stiff arms a guy. He's like 25 yards behind the line of scrimmage at the sideline and finds somebody in the back of the end zone. It was just ridiculous. I tweeted it out. You can go check it out on my Twitter. He made some ridiculous plays. Joe Burrow made some ridiculous plays in this game. It was just an all-time offensive performance as the QBs in this game combined for 740 yards and 9 touchdowns. Unfortunately for the Bengals, they dropped to 1-4. Joe Burrow is second in the league in EPA plus CPOE. He's third in EPA per play. He has a 1-4 record. This Bengals defense is awful, and Mark says that it's only going to continue to get worse. There were some injuries in this game for the Bengals defense. Turns out they should have paid Jesse Bates. You should probably pay a top 5 safety in the league when you draft them and they turn out to be that good. I'm looking at you, Bengals. I'm also looking at you, Giants. We're going to talk about Xavier McKinney in a bit. But Mark also notes that the Ravens defense is concerning him a little bit as well. So if you like offensive football, if you like back and forth shootouts and you just have time to go back and watch one game, go throw up the condensed version of this game. It was a really fun game to watch live on what I honestly was just a really good Sunday of football, in my opinion. So let's keep rolling here and let's go to Houston, where the Houston Texans knock off the Buffalo Bills 23-20. They sprinted out to a 14-3 lead in the first quarter. Unfortunately, Nico Collins left the game with a hamstring injury, and the Texans offense felt a big loss, or felt his loss in a big way. He had a 67-yard touchdown reception early before he went out with an injury, and the offense just kind of ground to a halt after that. And on the Bills side, this was the worst passing day of Josh Allen's career. He goes 9 of 30 passing for 131 yards and a touchdown. He took 1 sack. That 30% completion percentage is the lowest in NFL history in a game with at least 30 pass attempts. He was 1 of 15 on passes of 10-plus air yards. And so DeMeco Ryans' defense was able to really drop a net over the top and just shut Josh Allen and this offense down. And so you get to the end of the game. It is tied 20-20. And I thought the Bills had some really questionable game management at the end. They were pinned back at the 5-yard line. Okay, after a punt, they're at the 5 with no timeouts, and there's 32 seconds on the clock. And so you need to get 55 yards to attempt a 57-yard field goal in 32 seconds with no timeouts. The Bills called 3 straight pass plays, and on all 3 plays, the Texans had 2 safeties high, so you could have run the ball into a light box and just got to overtime. You could have thrown a higher percentage pass, but all 3 throws were downfield. They were deep targets. And maybe that's on Josh Allen just making those decisions. Maybe it's on play design. I don't know, but I thought it was terrible decision making. They end up going 3 and out and punting the ball back, and they only run 16 seconds off the clock. And so the Texans get it with 16 seconds. They complete 1 5-yard pass and hit a 59-yard field goal to win the game. And so I thought that was a really big mistake by the Bills there. It's not like Josh Allen was having one of his thermonuclear games or he's thrown for 400 50 yards. It's not like this is the Ravens-Bengals game and you've just been churning out yardage. You've been struggling all game. You're 9 of 27 passing at that point. Sometimes you just need to take it to overtime. So the Bills dropped to 3-2. Mark says he's not concerned about them at all. Their division is still pretty much a cakewalk with all the Dolphins injury issues and with the Patriots and, the Jets, who we already talked about, are kind of in disarray. So you're not concerned about them really winning their division. But this was a bad performance that they'll just have to flush and move on. On the Texans side, they are 4-1, but it just hasn't looked very good. And so the question is it sustainable? You've got Nico Collins injured, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be long-term, but hamstrings can linger. The Texans have a negative 12-point differential this season, and yet they're 4-1. They are the second worst in the league in EPA per play on first and second down. They are living on incredible third down performances by CJ Stroud right now. They have no running game. They have no first and second down success. And just relying on your quarterback to constantly bail you out on third down is a very dangerous place to be. And so the Texans, they need Joe Mixon back. They need a little bit of a running game, but ultimately they need to just start moving the chains before third down. You don't want to constantly live in this world. Okay, let's keep rolling to the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars are winless no more as they top the Colts 37-34. Trevor Lawrence gets his first win since week 12 of last season. That's crazy. 9 straight starts he had lost before this win. He goes 28-34 for 371 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did throw an interception. The Jags still did their best to blow this game, though. They allowed 24 fourth quarter points by the Colts. 24. They went up 14 points with 5 minutes left to play, and the defense promptly gives up a 3-play, 70-yard touchdown drive that took 42 seconds. Then the offense goes 3 and out, and then the defense gave up a 2-play, 77-yard touchdown drive that took 45 seconds. They gave up a 14-point lead in less than 2 minutes of game time. But that left enough time for the Jags to go get a field goal, to go back up 3 with 17 seconds left. And in the most shocking outcome of the day, the Jags defense was able to protect that 3-point lead for 17 seconds and get the win. The Colts offense put up nearly 450 yards in this game. They put up 34 points while missing Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, and their center Ryan Kelly, but they lost the game. Now, Mark points out that he thinks the Colts are better off with Flacco than they would be with Anthony Richardson, and that's true. Joe Flacco plays at a semi-high level for a vet. I mean, you don't want him to be your starter, but he's a top, 20, 25, probably top 20, we'll say, quarterback in the league still at this point. But you need Anthony Richardson to play. I mean, you got to find out what the kid is. It's looked bad. He needs back out there. And so hopefully he's able to get back on the field for Colts fans, even if it does cost them some games. He needs to be out there playing. He also noted that it was a great game from Trevor Lawrence, but he wonders how much of both of these performances were because of terrible defenses. And there was a lot of terrible defensive play in this one. Brian Thomas Jr. really shone for the Jags. He had 5 receptions on 8 targets for 122 yards and a touchdown. Alec Pierce for the Colts entered the fourth quarter with 0 targets. And then he had 3 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown in that fourth quarter on 3 targets. He leads the league in average depth of target at 27.1 yards. The gap between him and number 2 is the same as the gap between number 2 and number 19. And so Alec Pierce, downfield threat, definitely want to keep an eye on him over the top. Now let's move on to a game that you probably did not care to keep an eye on, and it is the Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots. Miami wins 15-10. I'm going to be honest. I couldn't be less interested in a football game. Like, if it was watch this game or just take the weekend off, I might just take the weekend off. This was the battle of a backup quarterback in Tyler Huntley and a guy who should be a backup quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. Both of these teams stink. Both of these teams are going nowhere. And I really don't have much else to say about them. This was just a brutal game. If you are picking one game to not go back and rewatch, I would encourage you to skip this one because there's just nothing there. Okay, let's get into the afternoon slate. And in the afternoon slate, we're going to start off in Denver. The Denver Broncos beat the Las Vegas Raiders 34-18. And Bo Nix recorded his first game with above a 100 passer rating, although it was only a 26.8 QBR. So they evaluate differently. QBR says he stinks. Passer rating said he was good. He went 19 of 27 for 206 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns. He took 3 sacks. He also rushed 8 times for 9 yards and 1 touchdown, which is some wild rushing statistics. For the Raiders, the Devontae Adams trade watch continues. As the Raiders continue to flounder, they drop to 2-3. Gardner Minshew was benched after starting 12 of 17 for 137 yards and 1 touchdown with 2 interceptions, one of which was a Patrick Surtain 100-yard pick six. They brought in Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell went 10 of 20 for 94 yards and an interception, so wasn't exactly an improvement. But the one thing still working for the Raiders is Max Crosby, who sacked Bo Nix 2 times. That makes Max Crosby the 4th player since 1982, which is not an arbitrary date. That's just when stats for individuals started being tracked. So he's the 4th player in recorded statistical NFL history to have at least 1 sack in 10 consecutive games against a single opponent. So Max Crosby just dominates the Denver Broncos, even if the Denver Broncos win this game. Okay, let's go on to San Francisco, where the San Francisco 49ers lose to the Arizona Cardinals 24-23. They dropped to 2-3. The Cardinals improved to 2-3 as the NFC West continues to be very strange this season. In the first half of this game, for the Cardinals, James Conner had 6 carries for 9 yards. Not very good. But in the second half, he had 13 carries for 77 yards, which isn't eye-popping. But with his running between the tackles and Kyler Murray's threat to break contain, it helped the Cardinals offense stay on schedule and not get behind the chains. And the Cardinals scored on their final 3 possessions of the game. They kicked a field goal, had a touchdown, and then kicked another field goal to knock off the 49ers. Kyler Murray's stats aren't stellar from this one. 19 of 30 for 195 yards and a touchdown with an interception. He also rushed for 83 yards and a touchdown, but he was a game changer in this game. He made some really big plays, including that long rushing touchdown. It was a 50-yarder. For the 49ers, the second half was just a disaster. On their 4 drives after half, they went interception. And then on the second one, they had a turnover on downs where they had a first down at the 14-yard line. But they took a penalty, then a sack that led them to a 4th and 23 from the 27-yard line. And since their kicker was injured, they had to go for that 4th and 23. It was out of their punter's range. He did hit a field goal from inside the 10-yard line earlier in the game. It was too far to go. They obviously did not convert a 4th and 23. The following drive, they had a 1st and goal and Jordan Mason fumbles, and then they had an interception on their final drive. This is the first time in Brock Purdy's career he has been shut out in the second half of a game. He went 19 of 35 for 244 yards and a touchdown with 2 interceptions. I guess the plus side for the 49ers is that Brandon Ayuk finally had his breakout game. He had 8 receptions for 147 yards after his tremendously slow start to the season following his contract dispute with the 49ers. He gets back on track. That 147 yards, I'm not sure if it actually doubled. Did it actually double his total for the season? No, it came close. He entered the day with 167, and he had 147 in that game. So the 49ers dropped to 2-3. That division, very much up for grabs. I put the Seahawks on fraud alert, but they still lead the division by a game, and I'm not sure you can trust any of these teams right now as we move forward. And then let's get on to the last game here. It is the Green Bay Packers at the Los Angeles Rams. The Packers win 24-19. Jordan Love went full Will Levis in this game with an interception while being tackled in his own end zone. It was a ludicrous play. You can go look it up. I tweeted the clip, but he then bounces back and he leads the Packers on back-to-back touchdown drives to start the second half and built out a 24-13 lead that they would never surrender. The Rams end up, they lose this game. They drop to 1-4, and they've had a ton of injuries. They've had 3 one-possession losses, but they're 1-4, and that's a tough place to be. Stafford had the ball with this one with under 3 minutes left, down 5, but ultimately it was a turnover on downs at the Green Bay 38 on 4th and 5. I think it's safe to say the best acquisition any team made this offseason in free agency was the Green Bay Packers getting Xavier McKinney. I alluded to this earlier that these teams letting these safeties go, and the Giants let Xavier McKinney go, and he's been a total game changer for the Green Bay Packers. And the Bengals letting Jesse Bates go, and it totally changed their defense, and he's been a game changer for the Falcons. But Xavier McKinney has an interception in all 5 games so far. He's got 6 interceptions on the year. He got one in this game. He almost had a second one. He recovered a fumble. He is the first player since at least 1970 to have an interception in his first 5 games with a new team. And so Xavier McKinney is on a tear. Mark said that he thinks Xavier McKinney is a top 25 player in football, and he might actually be a better safety than Kyle Hamilton. And that is high praise coming from Mark, if you know how much he loves Kyle Hamilton. So high praise there. The Rams, their defense could not get pressure in this game. They only had a 27.6% pressure rate, and it was only a 6% pressure rate when not blitzing. So I think, ultimately, Matthew Stafford makes the Rams fun to watch. There's always a chance that Stafford's magic will come into play and they're going to knock teams off. They're a dangerous team. I wouldn't want to play them, but I just don't think the talent's there for this team to be a serious threat for a playoff run at this point in time. And honestly, given Stafford's age and his injury status, I don't know that they really are a threat in Stafford's timetable. I mean, he's 36 years old. He's battled back injuries and shoulder injuries and all this stuff. I do kind of wonder if it's going to be time for the Rams to have some conversations about maybe trying to move on and really start this rebuild all the way around this offseason. But that's not a conversation for now. That's a conversation for around the trade deadline, which is or not around the trade. They're not trading him in season. It's a conversation for this offseason, maybe week 18 when we do our Fixing Your Franchise episode for those teams that are unfortunately eliminated from playoff contention. So that's going to do it for this episode, our week 5 reactions. I guess I should say my week 5 reactions is, unfortunately, if you missed the top of the show, Mark was sick, so I had to do this one alone, but he will be back next week, and we'll break down all of the week 6 action, including hopefully an Eagles victory over the Cleveland Browns. So thank you guys for joining us for episode 173 of Chalk Talk. This episode might not have fully lived up to the incredible week 5 action. And, my final thought, I guess, is that I feel like this is one of the best weeks of football I've watched top to bottom in a long time. Maybe it's compounded by the fact that the Phillies game was also on, and I was kind of halfway keeping an eye on it for my timeline so I could know what frame of mind they would be in. And that game was back and forth. And the Ravens game with the Bengals was back and forth. And like 3 of the 4 games in the afternoon slate came down to the wire, and the early game in London came down to the wire, and the night game comes down to a 4th and goal with under a minute left. And it just felt like there were a lot of games that were really good this week. And so shout out to the NFL for putting together a great week 5 slate. Hopefully week 6 is just as good, but even if it's not, we'll be back here to break it down next Monday for you. If you enjoy what you heard on this show, be sure you smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on the Eagles Pinpool Podcast Network. You can also check out my Patreon with Johnny Page at patreon.com/ontheshanepage. I put out all 22 film breakdowns for Jalen Hurts there. There's a lot of other perks that come along with this. You can join as a free member just to hang out. There's also a $3 and a $5 tier that unlocks some other perks. So be sure you go and check that out. We'll catch you guys next week for another episode of Chalk Talk.